Imagine trying to write the story of your own life, but instead of just relying on your memory to paint this really pretty picture, you are legally required to provide verifiable, time-stamped data.
Oh, man.
Right. For every single time your heart was broken or, every time you felt lost. And if you can't prove it with a photograph or some cross-referenced public record, you have to explicitly tag it as an unverified interpretation.
Just sounds completely exhausting.
It really does. I mean, it sounds almost entirely counter to what we actually think a memoir is supposed to be.
Well, yeah, because it fundamentally breaks that unwritten contract we usually have with authors of autobiographies.
Right.
Like, we normally accept that personal history is a little bit of a magic trick, We allow authors to smooth over the rough edges or to invent these cinematic transitions between years and, of course, to cast themselves in the best possible lighting.
We want the narrative arc. We don't usually ask for the receipts.
Exactly. We absolutely do not want an audit of someone's soul.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is going to be so challenging and frankly so fascinating. So welcome in.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, for you listening, we are putting a highly unusual, borderline unprecedented literary experiment under the microscope. The book is called The Geography of a Life by A.Ward.
And it is quite a ride.
It is. And our mission today is not just to, shower this book with praise or read it like a standard Sunday afternoon celebrity travelogue. We are going to really interrogate it.
Because it practically begs for that interrogation.
Yeah.
I mean, this text is a bizarre, compelling hybrid. On one level, it functions as a deeply emotional coming-of-age story about migration and identity.
Yeah.
But on another level, it reads like a rigid philosophical treatise. And then, in a pivot that we will definitely need to scrutinize later, it operates as the foundational constitution for an AI publishing house.
It's trying to be three entirely different things at once.
It really is.
So we are going to weigh the genuine, profound emotional highs of this book against some structural risks that are, to be perfectly honest, incredibly jarring for a casual reader.
Oh, absolutely.
We are asking the fundamental question here: what happens when a pharmaceutical validation engineer tries to write his life story with the exact same rigid discipline he uses to write a regulatory compliance manual?
Which is, again, essentially asking if it's possible to audit a human soul.
Yeah.
And to even begin answering that, we have to look at the baseline data. Because in any mapping system, to understand the coordinates of where you are, you have to know where zero is.
You need a starting point.
Right. And the prime meridian of this book is set deep in the south of Ireland.
Yes, the opening chapters are heavily anchored in Cork City, and specifically the town of Kinsale. And the overwhelming theme here isn't just, growing up Irish.
No, not at all.
It's about the sheer gravitational weight of inherited expectations. The book paints a picture of a community that is so tightly woven, it's almost inescapable.
The author designates this early portion as the geography of inheritance, which is just an incredibly precise term.
It really is.
He isn't just describing a hometown, He's describing a generational ecosystem where your path is essentially laid out for you before you're even born. Like, he attends a specific school, Coliast Criostry.
Which, for those of us not familiar with the local geography of Cork, why is that specific school so significant to him?
Well, it all ties back to the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association. In Ireland, the GAA isn't just a recreational sports league, right?
Right.
It is the absolute defining social fabric of a community.
Huh.
So when he was an 8-year-old boy, he watched his hero, a man named William Cummins, lift a championship trophy for that exact school.
I see.
So the lineage is just set in stone. His grandfather went there, his father went there, he has to go there.
It sounds almost dynastic, like a royal succession, but played out on local sports pitches. And the detail that really struck me was how the text establishes the concept of the hero. He talks extensively about William and Ray Cummins. Now, to the rest of Cork, these two are towering, mythical sporting legends. But in the book, he notes that they were literally his neighbors in a place called Lower Cove in Kinsale. His own father shared a pitch with Ray Cummins.
Which changes everything.
It does. So your heroes aren't distant figures on a television screen. They're the guys you buy milk from.
And that proximity creates a very specific kind of pressure. The standard of excellence isn't some abstract concept. I mean, it lives next door.
Yeah, the community becomes the ultimate arbiter of belonging.
Exactly. And that inherited gravity bleeds directly from his childhood into his adult professional life, culminating in where he actually ends up working.
Right. He takes a job as an engineer at Eli Lilly. And on the surface, you read that and think, well, great. Stable job, highly respected pharmaceutical company, excellent career move.
It looks perfect on paper.
But the text strips away the corporate veneer and reveals the emotional reality. His father worked at Eli Lilly. His sporting hero, Ray Cummins, worked at Eli Lilly.
It's that loop again.
Exactly. When David Ward goes to work, he is literally walking through the exact same physical factory gates his father walked through.
He is living a perfectly constructed, entirely inherited loop. He is successful, but it is a borrowed success.
Right.
And what's really compelling from a narrative standpoint is how this loop gets broken. Because it isn't an internal rebellion that breaks it.
No.
It is a massive external global shock.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this brings us to March 2020, the Boston trip. Walk us through how the book frames this inciting incident, because it honestly feels like a movie sequence.
It really does. So he has been planning this 3-week heritage trip to Boston for years.
Yeah.
It holds immense personal significance for him, tying all the way back to his university thesis on the St. Patrick's Day parade.
What?
Yeah. And the plan is to travel to the U.S. to reconnect with his childhood heroes who had emigrated there, people from that dense Cork ecosystem, like Lyndon Keeley and Kenny O'Regan.
So he's taking the Cork ecosystem on the road.
Essentially, yes. He finally lands in Boston, meets up with his friends, and they head to a local bar. He's got his Irish passport. He's ready for this massive culmination of years of planning.
But he barely gets a chance to even unpack his bags.
No, his phone rings in the bar. It's his travel agent. And she delivers a message that completely upends everything. She just says, you have 48 hours.
Because the COVID-19 pandemic has just triggered a global shutdown, the U.S. borders are closing.
Precisely. A meticulously planned 3-week dream trip is violently compressed into a chaotic 2-day scramble to just get out of the country before the doors lock.
There's a line in the book that summarizes this perfectly. He says, history didn't cancel his holiday, it interrupted his life.
That's a great line.
It is. So he is forced to retreat back to Ireland. But here is where the narrative completely subverts expectations. You would expect the following chapters to be about the terror and the isolation and the claustrophobia of the early 2020 lockdowns.
Right, because that was everyone's experience.
But that's not how he writes about it at all.
It's the exact opposite. He retreats to a property called Friar's Lodge in Kinsale, and he spends 16 weeks locked down there with 3 of his closest friends.
Okay.
And the way he documents this period is fascinating. Outside those walls, the global economy is in absolute freefall. Oil prices are crashing below zero. There is widespread panic. But inside Friar's Lodge, they construct this bulletproof sanctuary.
Yeah, they are drinking port late into the night. They are physically laboring to uncover old stone walls that have been hidden under ivy for decades.
Very tactile stuff.
Exactly. They even set up live streams for the isolated town with one of the friends playing music. They essentially build their own micro-civilization while the macro-civilization is just paused.
And that contrast is where the first major philosophical shift of the book occurs. Because stripped of the daily routine of the Eli Lilly factory gates and confined to this small, intentional community, he formulates a core principle.
What is it?
Home is not something you inherit. It is something you build.
Wow. That distinction between inheriting and building is huge.
Yeah.
Because it leads directly to the defining decision of his early life. He leaves Eli Lilly.
He does.
And I want to pause on this for a second because I think it really challenges the traditional way we view quitting. Usually in a memoir, if the protagonist quits their job, it's a dramatic escape.
Oh, sure. They have a toxic boss. They are suffering from massive burnout, or the company's doing something unethical.
Right. But the text is very careful to state the exact opposite. He explicitly notes his deep respect for the work he was doing and the people he worked with. There is no villain in that corporate structure.
Which makes the departure so much more difficult to understand and so much heavier emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
He isn't running away from misery. Leaving Eli Lilly, for him, is like abdicating a throne. He is refusing a perfectly good, warm, comfortable life that was handed to him.
The book phrases his internal realization beautifully. It says he wasn't afraid of leaving. He was afraid of never leaving.
Yeah.
It's the terrifying realization that a safe positive can be just as much of a trap as a negative. He has to walk away from the predetermined path in search of an authentic unknown.
And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to.
Absolutely. I want you, listening right now, to think about that dynamic in your own life for a moment. How many of us are sitting in a Friar's Lodge situation, a comfortable, safe space, doing a job that is perfectly fine, maybe even a job our parents are really proud of, and quietly harboring that exact same fear?
The fear of never leaving.
Exactly. It requires an enormous amount of friction to break orbit from a life that comfortable. And once he breaks orbit, the geography of the book completely shatters.
It really does. We leave the dense, intertwined, everyone knows everyone community of Cork, and we are suddenly thrust into the vast, locked-down emptiness of continental Europe.
Right. The book moves through Brussels, Amsterdam, Luxembourg, Bruges, and Barcelona.
And we have to remember the historical context here. This is late 2020 and early 2021. Continental Europe is effectively closed.
Right.
Curfews are in place, borders are heavily restricted, tourism is completely dead.
The atmosphere in these chapters is incredibly stark. There's this one sequence in Amsterdam that I found deeply moving. He is walking through the freezing, misty fog of the city in January with a woman named Louisa, who is originally from Colombia.
Yeah, that's a beautiful section.
And because the world is shut down, they can't go to museums or restaurants. All they can really do is walk.
But the act of walking takes on a profound significance when you consider Luisa's background. The text points out that when she was a young girl in Colombia, it wasn't safe for her to freely walk the streets of her own city.
So here they are, two people far from home, wandering through a deserted European capital under the guise of being tourists in a lockdown world.
Right.
And the book delivers this gut punch of an observation. He says freedom is walking a city that was once closed to you.
It's a brilliant synthesis of their two experiences. I mean, they are actively practicing freedom in a continent that has temporarily suspended it.
Yeah.
The internal production reports for the book actually highlight this specific European section as its strongest literary achievement. The editors compare his tone here to classic writers of travel and ideas, people like Patrick Leigh Fermor, who famously walked across Europe in the 1930s, or Raynor Winn's nature writing in The Salt Path.
And you can see why. The environmental details are just so vivid. Like, take the chapter in Barcelona. It is entirely surreal. He ended up living in an apartment right next to the Camp Nou, the legendary stadium where Lionel Messi plays.
Yes.
But because of the pandemic protocols, the stadium is a total ghost town.
So you have a man whose entire childhood identity was forged by watching local heroes in crowded GAA stadiums, now standing next to one of the most famous sports arenas on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's completely silent.
He describes just being out there alone, kicking a football around tens of thousands of empty seats. And then, in this incredibly bizarre, charming detail, his next-door neighbor turns out to be Angel Gallardo, an aging professional golf legend.
Oh, that part is amazing.
Right, and he ends up feeding them Swiss raclette over the balcony. It reads like magical realism.
It does, but it serves a distinct philosophical purpose. Ward uses this setting to establish another core principle. He says, the empty stadium is still a stadium.
I like that.
Right? The holy ground doesn't lose its sanctity simply because the crowd is gone. In some ways, the emptiness strips away the spectacle and allows him to access the raw geography of the place.
But the isolation of Barcelona also brings the first real emotional fracture of the journey, because Louisa has to leave. She returns to Brussels for work.
And the narrative handles this separation with a really refreshing lack of melodrama. He promises he will follow her to Brussels, but he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. The text just presents the quiet, heavy honesty of a promise that gradually morphed into a different story.
Yeah.
And you can just feel him begin to drift after she leaves. He becomes untethered from any specific purpose.
Which leads directly to what I consider the absolute hinge of the entire memoir. Because he travels to Rome.
Right.
He is wandering through countless churches, caught in this strange state of grief, aimlessness, and spiritual appetite. And he eventually walks into a confession booth in the Vatican.
As one does, just a casual Tuesday in the Vatican.
Right. It's one of those moments that if you wrote it as fiction, an editor would tell you it's just way too contrived.
Totally.
He enters the booth as a completely lost man. And the stranger sitting on the other side of the screen, the priest, happens to have just returned from walking the Camino de Santiago.
Wait, really? You cannot script that kind of serendipity. He is literally asking for direction in the center of the Catholic faith, and a priest gives him the exact geographic coordinates to find himself.
It's wild. And acting on that immediate impulse, Ward leaves Italy, travels to Spain, and begins to walk the Camino, nearly 1,000 kilometers across the northern edge of the Iberian Peninsula.
And this section of the book is undeniably powerful because it subverts the typical pilgrimage trope, right? Like usually these stories build to a massive, triumphant crescendo when the traveler finally reaches the destination.
Oh, absolutely. But Ward just minimizes the arrival. When he finally reaches the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, the text barely lingers on it.
Really?
Yeah, he notes that in his personal archive, the arrival is represented by a single photograph, whereas the journey itself is documented by 300.
Wow.
The destination is almost irrelevant. The transformation is entirely physical and procedural.
Well, let's talk about the physical objects in this section because they carry immense metaphoric weight, specifically the tent.
Oh, the tent is central to understanding his psychological state. When he begins the massive trek, he is carrying this heavy, cumbersome tent on his back.
Yeah.
It represents his lingering need for absolute security. He wants to carry his home with him so that he is never truly vulnerable to the elements of the unknown.
But the reality of walking nearly 1,000 kilometers quickly punishes that desire for security. I mean, just 5 kilometers into the route, the physical weight of this tent is essentially breaking him.
Yeah, he's barely started.
He is exhausted, his back is in agony, and he faces a critical choice.
So he abandons the tent, he leaves it behind, and commits to walking the rest of the vast distance with nothing but a hammock and a sleeping bag.
He has to drop the physical weight in order to shed the emotional weight he's been carrying since he left Ireland. The principle he extracts from this moment is incredibly sharp. He says, the walk begins the moment you drop the weight.
That's a powerful realization.
It is. I want to pause here again and ask you, the listener, to map that onto your own life. Think about the tent you are carrying on your back right now. What is that heavy, safe, secure thing you absolutely refuse to drop?
It could be anything.
Right. Maybe it's a job title you cling to for status, or a relationship that is actually exhausting you, but it feels like home, so you just keep hauling it around. Ward is arguing that you haven't actually started your true journey until you have the courage to leave that heavy safety net on the side of the road.
And that theme of intentional abandonment repeats later in the European journey. When he eventually has to transition from Spain to Switzerland, he realizes he cannot take his beloved BMX bike on the train with him.
Oh, right, the bike.
His friends have been looking after it. It was a piece of his identity, but logistics dictate he has to leave it.
He ends up chaining it to a lamppost in the coastal town of Sitges. And the book reflects that the BMX bike was the part of him that simply had to stay behind in Spain. These tangible, heavy details, the heavy tent, the chained bike, the vast, empty stadium in Barcelona, they anchor his lofty philosophical ideas in dirt and steel and sweat.
It's brilliant travel writing.
It is, however, and this is a massive however.
Here we go.
This is where we have to drastically shift our critical lens. Because while the emotional journey is compelling, we absolutely must address how this book is physically constructed on the page.
You are referring to the evidence tag apparatus.
Yes, and frankly, this is where my reading experience hit a massive wall. I need you to explain this because I found it incredibly frustrating.
Okay, I can do that.
Here is the situation for the reader. You are deeply immersed in a beautifully written, highly evocative passage. He's describing the freezing fog in Amsterdam or the quiet heartbreak of leaving a bike chained to a lamppost. I am emotionally invested.
Naturally.
And then, smack in the middle of a sentence, the text is violently interrupted by bracketed database tags. Photo, David. Interp. Research.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It completely threw me out of the narrative. It feels like I'm trying to appreciate a beautiful painting, but someone has taped the purchase receipts for the paint over the canvas.
That's a great way to put it.
Is this structure actually brilliant, or is it just a massive self-indulgent distraction?
I completely understand the frustration. And to evaluate whether it's brilliant or annoying, we have to demand an explanation of how and why this system exists in the text at all.
Please.
What's fascinating here is that every single memory, claim, or environmental detail in this memoir is subjected to a rigid discipline of source tagging. If you see the photo tag in the text, it means Ward possesses verifiable, time-stamped photographic evidence of that exact moment.
Okay.
The David tag indicates that the information relies purely on his own subjective, uncorroborated memory. Interp is used when he is actively interpreting or analyzing a situation, admitting his bias. And research means the detail is backed by external, verifiable public records.
Okay, I understand what the tags are, but why apply this incredibly clinical database structure to a story about a broken heart and a long walk? Writing a memoir is not the same thing as coding software.
No, it's not. But to understand the why, we have to look closely at his professional pedigree. Before he ever walked the Camino, Ward studied GIS at University College Cork, Geographic Information Systems. It is a highly technical field that involves taking physical terrain, mountains, rivers, city streets, and turning it into structured, queryable data layers on a computer. He was literally trained to convert reality into databases.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Following that, he spent nearly a decade working in pharmaceutical manufacturing, specifically doing validation engineering.
Okay, stop right there. Validation engineering. I need I'm 5 on what that actually means on a day-to-day basis because it just sounds like corporate jargon.
Fair enough. Imagine a pharmaceutical company is making a batch of a life-saving vaccine. They can't just mix the chemicals together, bottle it up, and say, trust us, it works.
Obviously.
They have to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the temperature in the mixing tank was exactly 40 degrees for exactly 10 minutes.
Right.
To do this, they use massive, complex software systems. But the book mentions 2 specific ones, MES, which stands for Manufacturing Execution Systems, and Delta V, which is a distributed control system that manages the physical valves and sensors in the factory. A validation engineer's entire job is to test these systems and generate the mathematical and documentary proof that they do exactly what they claim to do. The absolute golden rule in pharmaceutical manufacturing is if it is not documented, it is a rumor. It legally did not happen.
Wow. So if you spend 10 years operating under the strict legal framework, that undocumented reality is a rumor, that paranoia or that discipline inevitably bleeds into how you view your own memories.
Exactly. His professional worldview is entirely built on the concept of auditability. So when he sits down to write the story of his life, he cannot bring himself to just ask the reader for blind trust.
He can't do it.
He treats his own human soul as a verifiable data set. He doesn't just want you to believe he was standing outside the Camp Nou in Barcelona. He wants to show you the metadata.
I see the logic, but as a literary device, it is incredibly abrasive. To use an analogy, it feels like a master architect building a breathtaking, sweeping stone cathedral, but then deliberately leaving the ugly metal scaffolding all over the exterior walls just to prove to the public that the building is structurally sound.
Yes.
Yes, I know it's safe, but you've ruined the view. Does a general audience really want to see the database tags interrupting the poetry?
It's a very valid critique, and it's one that his own publishing team wrestled with immensely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the internal production reports for the Geography of a Life explicitly flagged this exact issue. They use that exact sentiment, worrying that the scaffolding obscures the building. The editors knew it was the single biggest commercial risk of the project, and they even debated creating a light version for the mainstream trade market, where the tags were removed so the pros could breathe.
Oh, wow. So why keep them? Why force the reader to stumble over this structural scaffolding?
Because of the cultural moment in which this book is being released, we have to look at the broader context of the AI revolution.
Okay, here we go.
We're currently drowning in an era of deepfakes, hallucinated text, and synthetic media. We are rapidly approaching a point where we cannot trust anything we see or read online.
That is undeniably true.
Right. So Ward is using his memoir to make a profound, aggressive, philosophical stand about provenance. His core thesis is stated clearly: nothing trusted because it happened, everything trusted because reconstructible.
Reconstructible.
He is arguing that in a world of infinite AI-generated noise, the only things that will hold any value are the things that carry their own unshakable proof of origin. The scaffolding isn't just there to prove the building is safe. The scaffolding is the art.
He is basically saying, I am a human being, and here is my cryptographic proof.
Precisely.
It is certainly a radical concept, but this obsession with verifiable data bleeds directly into the third act of the book, which brings us to what I want to call the founder problem.
This is a tricky part.
It is, because if you thought the evidence tags were a jarring shift in tone, the final movement of this book takes a drastic, head-spinning turn away from travelogue and straight into the corporate tech world.
Right. The book shifts geographically to Switzerland. He moves to a town called Sion in the Canton de Valais, which introduces a new language, French, and a completely different rhythm of life. The chapter is titled Replaying the Substrate.
And the contrast to the Spanish chapters is massive. The guy who was freely wandering the Camino with a hammock on his back is suddenly locked into a grueling 7-hour daily commute on Swiss trains to the city of Lucerne.
Yeah, it's a harsh pivot.
He is back in the trenches doing highly rigorous manual pharmaceutical validation work, and the timing of this section is almost too perfect. He is doing the most exhausting manual evidence-based documentation work on the planet during the exact same week in November 2022 that OpenAI launches ChatGPT to the world.
It is a phenomenal collision of eras. I mean, on the train to Lucerne, he is manually proving that regulated systems can be trusted, while on his phone, he is watching the birth of a technology that can generate infinite, highly convincing content with absolutely zero proof or provenance.
He captures the physical toll of that realization with a great line. He says, "You feel the future first as exhaustion in the present."
Which is such a brilliant way to phrase it.
It is, but this is where my major issue with the book arises. The narrative stops being a lyrical memoir about finding yourself, and it suddenly morphs into the founding origin story of several corporate entities.
Yeah.
We are suddenly reading about the creation of Brehon AI, a company called Alex Wenger Golf, and ultimately a software system called DavidOS.
And he states his motivation for this pivot very clearly.
Right.
He says he couldn't bear watching good ideas lose their history. He looks at the AI boom and realizes that without rigorous provenance, human knowledge eventually degrades into mere opinion.
Okay, but again, I need you to explain the mechanism here. What actually is DavidOS? Is it an app you download on your phone? Is it a blockchain ledger? Because the book introduces it, but it feels incredibly abstract.
DavidOS is essentially an operating system for ideas, structured entirely around the principles of pharmaceutical validation that we discussed earlier. It is a rigid, unhackable governance structure.
Okay.
Think of it as a filing system where every single piece of information, whether it's a business plan, a design document, or a memory, is required to carry its own birth certificate. It tracks who created the idea, when they created it, and what evidence supports it, so that as an idea moves through a company or a culture, its history can never be severed from it.
That is an interesting concept for a white paper. But as a reader of a memoir, I have to challenge this. Does this venture capital material actually earn its place in a deeply personal book about heartbreak, migration, and Irish identity? Or does it turn a beautiful piece of literature into a Trojan horse for a tech founder's prospectus?
Look, it's the most common and valid critique of the book. And once again, the internal documents show that Ward's team was acutely aware of the danger. The preliminary literary critiques of this section admit that Movement 3 feels thin and unwritten when compared to the incredibly rich tactile detail of the Cork and Spain chapters.
The ending of the book is particularly messy because of this. The editors even point out that the book double closes.
Yeah, that's true.
You have this soaring, poetic reflection on geography, mountains, and the lessons of the road, and then it awkwardly competes with a literal testimony about software architecture. It's like watching a gorgeous indie film that suddenly cuts to a commercial for enterprise B2B software in the final 5 minutes.
It is a severe collision of formats. It really challenges the reader's patience. However, if we evaluate whether the ending ultimately works, I would argue that the book just barely manages to save itself through a very strict internal rule that the author established.
What rule is that?
The companies and the software Brehon AI, DavidOS, are never presented as a catalog. There is no sales pitch. They are allowed into the text only as a direct inheritance of his philosophical journey.
Walk me through the logic of that inheritance. How does a tech startup inherit the legacy of a walk across Spain?
Well, the book makes the case that his background in engineering didn't replace his human experiences, rather. Engineering became the grammar he used to understand his human experiences.
Interesting.
He didn't wake up one morning and randomly decide to become a tech founder to get rich. The intense, step-by-step discipline he learned while surviving the Camino merged with the relentless, prove-everything discipline he learned in pharmaceutical validation.
Oh, I see.
The tech products were simply the physical manifestation of those merged disciplines. He built DavidOS because, based on the trajectory of his life, it was the only logical thing left to build.
There is a principle he outlines in the Switzerland section that perfectly encapsulates this. Your first discipline becomes your universal grammar.
Exactly.
I actually really appreciate that concept. The idea is that if you master one rigorous craft, whether it's engineering or classical music or carpentry, that craft isn't a cage that limits you. It becomes the syntax, the language that you use to understand and build in every other domain of your life.
Right.
He views software architecture through the lens of a long walk, and he views memory through the lens of a validation protocol.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The book isn't trying to sell you software. It is trying to argue that the software was an inevitable biological result of the geography he moved through.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most important question of this deep dive. If we strip away the highly specific details, if you are not an Irish engineer, if you have never worked in pharma validation, if you have no interest in walking the Camino de Santiago, and if you couldn't care less about AI governance software, why should you read this book?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
Why does a reader in Tokyo or New York or London care about David Ward's hyper-specific geographical footprint?
Because beneath the evidence tags and the tech jargon, the international appeal of this book relies entirely on its structural human themes. At its core, this is a book about migration. It's about the universal struggle for belonging. Look at the linguistic journey alone. He moves from the insular English of Cork to the expansive Spanish of the Camino to the precise French of the Swiss Alps. That act of having to translate yourself, of having to become a slightly different person to survive in a new landscape, is a profoundly universal human experience.
And the principles he extracts from these hyper-specific locations scale beautifully to everyday life. They become maxims that anyone in any profession can utilize.
Definitely.
Take his observation about Luxembourg. He spends time in this tiny European nation and writes small and central beats large and far. It's a brilliant realization that you don't need to be massive or loud to be important. You just need to be highly trusted and positioned in the center of the network.
Or consider the lesson he learns at Sobrato, a monastery in Galicia where he rests during the Camino. He observes rest is a station, not a break.
I love that one. The idea that resting isn't an indulgent escape from your work or your journey. Rest is a structurally required station built into the route so that you don't collapse before the end.
And perhaps the most challenging maxim comes when he is boarding the train to leave Spain for Switzerland. He writes, "Choose uncertainty on purpose."
Because true growth almost never happens when you maneuver yourself into a more comfortable position. It happens when you deliberately step onto a train, fully aware that you were going to lose the solid ground you were just standing on, but choosing to go anyway.
What David Ward has achieved here, despite the frustrating database brackets, despite the jarring structural risks, and despite the messy pivot into tech founding, is a remarkable conversion.
Yeah.
He has taken incredibly dry, abstract concepts about auditable systems and data provenance, and he has successfully mapped them onto a deeply felt human life. Ultimately, the geography of a life is tapping into a universal anxiety. It isn't just the fear that we might forget our past. It is the much deeper fear of losing the relationships between our memories.
The fear that if we don't rigorously document who we were and how we got from point A to point B, the grand narrative of our life will just degrade into disjointed noise.
Precisely. We all possess a fundamental desire to know that our past is real, that our struggles meant something, and that our journey tracks logically to where we are now. Ward simply took that desire to its absolute logical extreme.
So as we wrap up this massive journey, let's look back at the map we've covered. We started in the dense, heavy gravity of Cork, where the expectations of your life are inherited, where your heroes live next door, and where the easiest thing to do is walk through the exact same factory gates as your father.
A powerful starting point.
We followed a sudden rupture into the lockdown, misty emptiness of continental Europe, discovering that freedom can be found in walking a deserted city, and that true progress only begins when you have the courage to drop your heavy tent on a Spanish trail.
Yes.
And we finally arrived in the highly regulated, reconstructed reality of Switzerland, where a man attempted to build a technological operating system to save the truth of his own memories.
It is a meticulously documented map of a life, and it serves as a powerful argument that the physical places we go, the geography we move through, literally installs the operating system in our heads.
Which brings us right back to our opening thought, that broken X-ray machine of human memory. David Ward built an elaborate, uncompromising apparatus to X-ray his own past, refusing to let any memory slide by without a birth certificate.
It's intense.
It is. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over today. If you had to look at the landscape of your own life right now and apply David Ward's rigorous evidence tags.
Good luck with that.
Seriously. If you had to label your most cherished foundational memories with a photo tag to prove they happened exactly as you remember them, or an interp tag to admit that it's just your subjective, self-serving spin, how much of what you consider your core identity is actually verifiable truth, and how much of it is just a comfortable, unverified story you've been telling yourself for years to avoid dropping the weight?
It is a terrifying but entirely necessary audit.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the muddy, mapped out waters of memory and provenance. Keep questioning the map, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.